The rain on Concordia Station did not fall from the sky. It sweated from the ceiling panels of the atmospheric dome, a constant greasy drizzle that smelled of recycled ozone and weary machinery. It slicked the neon-drenched pavement of the Grand Bazaar, reflecting the holographic advertisements for synthetic happiness and cheap peace. Lyra Vey moved through the crowd like a drop of ink falling through clear water. She was tall, even by the standards of the galaxy's varied species, and she moved with a fluidity that betrayed her origins on the ocean world of Istra. Her skin was a pale, luminescent blue, marked with faint, darker shifting patterns that rippled along her collarbone, a biological mood ring she had learned to suppress into a stoic mask. She wore a coat of matte charcoal synthweave, the collar turned up to hide the gills at her neck, her eyes scanning the chaotic tapestry of the marketplace. She was not here for the spices of the Krell merchants or the illegal cybernetics being hawked in the shadows of the ventilation stacks. Lyra was a ghost, an intelligence officer for the Eastern Syndic, and she was hunting for ghosts. 3 weeks. That was how long the peace negotiators had been disappearing. The galaxy was currently balancing on the edge of a knife. The Great War between the Human Coalition and the Eastern Syndic had ended only 2 years ago. Not with a handshake, but with a sudden, exhausted collapse of resources. Into that power vacuum had stepped the Heliox Dominion, a corporate empire that sold weapons to both sides and now claimed to be the arbiters of peace. They were the bankers of the apocalypse, holding the debt of half the known worlds. But the peace was fragile, a ceasefire held together by spit and prayer. And now, the diplomats maintaining that ceasefire were vanishing. Lyra paused by a stall selling roasted lizards on sticks. She checked the datapad concealed in her glove. The signal she was tracking, a faint encrypted burst used by Syndic spies, had pinged here. But Lyra had a second, darker mandate, one she had not even whispered to her handler. She was looking for a myth, the Eater Blade. In the ancient texts of her people, it was a weapon of such profound wrongness that to look upon it was to invite madness. It was said to drink the self, to consume the neural signature of the victim, trapping their consciousness in a prism of eternal agony while empowering the wielder. If Heliox had the blade, they weren't just planning a war. They were planning an extermination. A commotion near the docking clamps drew her attention. The distinct, sharp crack of a human voice rose above the alien chatter. Lyra adjusted her trajectory. She pushed through a knot of methane breathers, her movements precise, efficient. Standing near the loading ramp of a battered, rusted freighter named the Lucky Hazard was a human male. He was arguing with a frantic-looking port official and 2 Heliox security drones. The human was Rylan Cade. Lyra recognized him from the dossier. Former Coalition diplomat, the youngest in a century, until he had spectacularly resigned during the Treaty of Altair, calling the High Admiral a butcher on a live galactic feed. Now, he was a smuggler, or, as his file generously put it, a high-risk salvage and humanitarian logistics specialist. He looked the part. He wore a heavy flight jacket that had seen better decades, and his dark hair was a mess that suggested he had either just woken up or had been in a fight. He had a crooked smile that seemed entirely inappropriate for a man surrounded by armed drones. "You cannot impound the crate based on a suspicion," Rylan was saying, his voice smooth, carrying the practiced cadence of someone used to lying to senators. "That is medical equipment for the refugee colony on Sector 4. It is pediatric filtration units. Are you telling me Heliox wants to explain to the press why they are letting orphans breathe sulfur?" The port official, a sweating human in an ill-fitting uniform, waved a datapad. The weight discrepancy is 40 kilos. Cade. "And the radiation scanners are fuzzing out. Open the crate." Rylan leaned against the landing strut of his ship, crossing his arms. I can't. It is vacuum sealed. You break the seal. You void the warranty. I don't have the credits to replace it, and neither do you. Open it, or we arrest you for trafficking Class A contraband. The official snapped. The drones buzzed, their weapons cycling up. Lyra watched from the shadows. She analyzed the situation in a heartbeat. Rylan Cade was lying. His heart rate, visible to her thermal vision as a flushed heat map on his neck, was elevated. But it was not fear. It was anticipation. He was ready to draw the blaster strapped to his thigh. He would be dead in 3 seconds. The drones were shield-hardened. Lyra needed him. He was the only pilot who had been running routes through the blockade zones where the negotiators had vanished. She stepped out of the shadows. "Stand down," she commanded. Her voice was low, melodic, but it carried the imperious weight of the Eastern Command frequency. The official jumped. The drones spun toward her, then hesitated as their sensors read the cryptographic key she broadcasted from her wrist unit. "Lyra Vey, Eastern Intelligence," she said, walking toward them. The crowd parted instantly. Astrans were rare this far out, and Astran operatives were rumored to kill with a touch. The official stammered, "Agent Vey, we have a smuggler here refusing inspection." "I am aware," Lyra said. She stopped 2 meters from Rylan. She looked him up and down. He was taller than she expected, and his eyes, a sharp, intelligent hazel, narrowed as he assessed her. There was no gratitude in his face, only calculation. "This man is a confidential informant for the Syndic," Lyra lied smoothly. "The cargo is under diplomatic seal." Rylan blinked. He opened his mouth, then shut it. He looked at Lyra, then back at the drones. "Right. Yes. Confidential. That is me. Extremely confidential." The official looked between them. "I have no record of this, because that is how confidential it is," Rylan said, recovering his wits instantly. "If you had a record, I would be a terrible spy, wouldn't I?" Lyra stepped closer to the official, lowering her voice to a lethal whisper. "Let the shipment pass, or I will file a report stating that this docking bay is harboring Eastern dissidents. The investigation alone will shut you down for 6 months." The official paled. He signaled the drones to lower their weapons. "Fine. Take your junk, but if anything blows up, it is on your head." He hurried away, the drones trailing him. Rylan let out a breath and turned to Lyra. His crooked smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nice save. I assume you didn't do that out of the goodness of your heart, Agent. Or do you just have a thing for rugged ex-diplomats with authority issues?" Lyra didn't smile. She stepped into his personal space, her height forcing him to look up slightly. She was fast. Before Rylan could react, she had him pinned against the strut of his ship, her forearm against his throat. It wasn't enough to choke him, just enough to remind him of the physics of the situation. "Who are you working for?" "Cade," she demanded. Rylan didn't struggle. He held his hands up, palms open. "Currently, myself, and the orphans. Don't forget the orphans. Drop the act," Lyra hissed. 3 negotiators have vanished on your route in the last month. You are the common denominator. Are you selling them to Heliox?" Rylan's expression hardened. The charm evaporated, revealing the steel beneath. "I don't sell people. I smuggle food, medicine, and the occasional bottle of real whiskey. If people are disappearing, it's because your government and the coalition are too busy playing Cold War games to protect them." Lyra searched his face. Astrans could read micro-expressions better than any polygraph. He was telling the truth. Or he was a sociopath. She released him, stepping back and smoothing her coat. Then you won't mind if I inspect your cargo. Rylan rubbed his throat. I thought you said it was under diplomatic seal. I lied, Lyra said. Open the crate. Rylan sighed. He gestured to the heavy plasteel container sitting on the hover dolly. Look, I picked it up on a derelict moon in the Veil Nebula. Some excavation team wiped out by a gravity storm. It was the only thing intact. My crew calls it the Cursed Bach, and we were going to sell it to a museum on Centauri. He keyed the biometric lock. The clamps hissed. The heavy lid of the crate groaned as it lifted. Lyra felt it before she saw it. It was a sound that wasn't a sound, a vibration in the fluid of her inner ear, a thump-thump that synchronized with her own heart's. The air around the crate grew instantly cold, the humidity freezing into tiny crystals that danced in the air. Rylan frowned. It never did that before. Inside the crate, resting on a bed of decaying velvet, was the sword. It was exquisite and terrifying. The metal was not steel, it was a solidified shadow, black and silver simultaneously, shifting like oil on water. The hilt was long, wrapped in a material that looked like white leather but felt, to Lyra's senses, like compressed bone. Along the blade, runic etchings pulsed with a faint, violet light, the color of a dying star. Lyra's breath hitched. She took a stumbling step back. No, she whispered. Rylan looked at the weapon. Huh. Creepy. Looks expensive, though. Maybe we can get 10,000 for it on the black mark. Do not touch it, Lyra snapped, her voice cracking with a panic Rylan had not thought her capable of. She stared at the blade. It was the Eater. The legends were true. It wasn't just a relic. It was a predator. And it was awake. It had sensed her proximity, her Eastern biosignature, and it was singing to her. Rylan looked at her, concerned now. You know what this is? It is the Eater blade, Lyra said, her voice trembling. Close the box. Cade, seal it. Weld it shut. We have to jettison it into a sun. Rylan laughed nervously. Okay, you are serious. Throw away a fortune? Why? Is it radioactive? It is hungry, Lyra said. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and dark. It does not cut flesh. It severs the quantum strings of the consciousness. It eats souls. Rylan stared at the sword. He reached out a hand, hovering over it. It feels warm, like it's humming. Get away from it. Lyra lunged, grabbing his shoulder to pull him back. At that moment, the warehouse roof exploded. Debris rained down as a dropship roared overhead, its engines screaming. 3 cables dropped, and figures in red and black armor slid down with terrifying speed. Heliox, strike team, Lyra shouted, pulling her sidearm, a sleek, coherent light pistol. The soldiers hit the ground and opened fire immediately. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the wet pavement. Rylan dove behind the landing strut, dragging Lyra with him. They are here for the crate, Lyra yelled over the roar of weapons fire. They tracked it. Rylan pulled his blaster, popping up to fire 2 shots. One glanced off a soldier's shield, the other took a drone in the sensory cluster. There are a dozen of them. We can't hold them off. More troops were fast roping down. They were elite shock troopers, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They weren't moving to kill. They were moving to contain. They formed a perimeter around the crate. Civilians in the bazaar were screaming, stampeding. A stray plasma bolt hit a fuel canister near a food stall, and a ball of orange fire erupted, knocking people flat. Lyra saw a mother and child pinned down by the crossfire, huddled behind a flimsy plastic kiosk. A Heliox heavy trooper was advancing, his suppression cannon cycling up, indifferent to the collateral damage. We have to go, Rylan shouted. My ship is right there. We can't leave the sword. Lyra returned fire, dropping a trooper, and if they take it, millions will die. The heavy trooper turned his cannon toward the civilians. He didn't care about them. He was clearing the field of fire. Ryland saw it too. He looked at his blaster. It was a pea shooter against that heavy armor. He looked at the ship. The ramp was too far. Then he looked at the open crate. The sword lay there, exposed, the violet runes pulsing faster, brighter. It was 10 feet away. The sword whispered to him, not in words, but in a sudden, violent clarity. It offered him a solution. It offered him the power to stop the monster in the heavy armor. It offered him the strength to save the child. Ryland, no! Lyra saw his eyes shift. She saw the seduction take hold. Ryland holstered his blaster. He sprinted. He didn't run away. He ran toward the crate. The heavy trooper saw him and swiveled. The cannon barrel began to spin. Lyra screamed, her voice tearing through the chaotic noise of the battle. She yelled the ancient warning, the prophecy of the doomed. It is the sword that devours souls. She warned him, but he gripped it anyway. Ryland didn't stop. He slid across the wet pavement, his hand reaching into the crate. His fingers closed around the white hilt. Time stopped. Or rather, Ryland's perception of time shattered. The moment skin touched the hilt, a shockwave of cold. Violet light exploded outward. It wasn't an explosion of heat, but of pure force. The rain hanging in the air vaporized. The Heliox troopers were knocked back as if hit by a gale. Ryland stood up. He didn't feel like Ryland Cade anymore. The exhaustion was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, roaring ocean of power. He felt the heartbeat of every person in the bazaar. He felt the terror of the child. He felt the mechanical aggression of the troopers. And he felt the hunger, a bottomless ancient starvation that demanded to be fed. The sword was light in his hand, almost weightless. The blade extended, glowing with a ferocious intensity. The heavy trooper recovered and fired. Ryland didn't dodge. He simply wasn't there anymore. He moved with a speed that blurred the eye. He was a streak of shadow and violet light. He appeared in front of the heavy trooper, the sword swinging in a clean, horizontal arc. There was no resistance. The molecular edge of the eater blade didn't just cut the armor, it unmade it. The trooper's cannon was sliced in half. The trooper himself was bisected at the waist, but there was no blood. As the blade passed through the soldier, a scream echoed, not from the soldier's mouth, but from the air itself. A jagged, ghostly image of the man seemed to be ripped from his physical body, a glowing white silhouette that was sucked violently into the runes of the blade. The sword pulsed. Ryland gasped, his back arching. He felt a rush of memories that weren't his. Boot camp, the smell of his mother's cooking, the order to fire. Then it was gone, digested. The power in his veins doubled. The other Heliox soldiers opened fire. Ryland laughed. It was a terrible sound, devoid of humor. He spun, the sword creating a defensive web of light that vaporized the incoming plasma. He advanced. One swing, another soul ripped from its casing, another rush of stolen life. He moved through them like a reaper. The sword guided his hand, correcting his stance, optimizing his lethality. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. Lyra watched, frozen. She had seen violence. She had seen war. But this was desecration. Ryland was moving with the grace of an Eastern blade master, but with the brutality of a machine. Every kill fed the light in the sword, and every kill made Ryland's eyes glow brighter with that same sick, violet hue. He reached the last trooper, the squad leader. The man was backing away, terror visible even through his helmet. Ryland raised the sword. The blade hummed, a sound like a choir of the damned. "Rylan!" Lyra shouted. "Unstop!" The voice pierced the fog of power. Rylan hesitated. The sword screamed in his mind. "Finish it! Take him! He is fuel! We are strong!" Rylan's hand trembled. He looked at the soldier, then at the sword. He looked at the civilians he had just saved, who were now looking at him with more fear than they had looked at the Heliox death squad. He grit his teeth. With a roar of effort, he forced his arm down, driving the tip of the blade into the concrete instead of the man's chest. "Get out of here!" Rylan snarled at the soldier. The trooper turned and ran, scrambling over the debris. Rylan fell to his knees. The violet light in his eyes faded, leaving him gasping, sweating, and shaking violently. The sword remained in his grip, the runes dimming to a sullen, unsatisfied pulse. Silence fell over the docking bay, broken only by the hiss of rain on hot metal and the distant sirens of station security. Lyra walked toward him slowly, her weapon still drawn. She stopped 5 feet away. "Drop it," she said. Her voice was cold, shaking with suppressed rage. Rylan looked up. He looked wreck. His skin was pale, his pupils dilated. He tried to open his hand. I can't," he whispered. His fingers were locked around the hilt. The white material seemed to have fused slightly to his glove. Lyra holstered her weapon and knelt beside him. She didn't touch him. "You idiot," she hissed, but there was no venom in it, only fear. "You absolute reckless human idiot. I told you." Rylan let out a shaky laugh. He looked at the bisected armor of the heavy trooper, then at the empty space where the man's essence should have been. "I felt him," Rylan whispered. "When he died, I felt him simply cease, and then I felt full." He looked at Lyra, horror dawning on his face. "What did I just do?" "You fed it," Lyra said grimly. She stood up, looking at the approaching security lights. "And now it has bonded to you. If we try to cut it out of your hand now, the feedback will likely lobotomize you." She grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and hauled him to his feet. "Come on. We have to move. Heliox will be back with a battalion in 10 minutes, and station security will arrest us for massacre." Rylan stumbled, using the sword as a cane when the tip sparked against the ground. "Where are we going?" "My safe house," Lyra said, dragging him toward the darker maintenance tunnels of the Undercity. "You are going to help me stop this war." "Cade?" "Why?" Rylan asked, wincing as a headache spiked behind his eyes. "Because," Lyra said, looking back at the carnage he had wrought. "You are the only one holding the leash of the monster now, and I need to teach you how not to become it." They disappeared into the shadows of Concordia, the sword trailing a faint, hungry purple mist in their wake. An alliance born of necessity, sealed by a theft of souls. The game had changed. The Eater had returned, and the galaxy had no idea that its fate now rested in the hands of a smuggler who had just tasted the intoxicating flavor of godhood. The turbolift descended into the bowels of Concordia Station with a shuddering groan that vibrated through Rylan Cade's boots. The polished chrome and holographic skies of the upper levels were kilometers above them now. Here, the air tasted of recycled coolant, rust, and the damp, earthy rot of hydroponic failure. Rylan leaned against the scarred metal wall of the lift, cradling his right arm. The Eater blade was still fused to his hand, the white, bone-like grip feeling less like an object and more like a cold, heavy extension of his own nervous system. The violet runes along the dark metal were dormant now, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic lethargy that matched his own heartbeat. Lyra Vey stood by the control panel, her back to him. The faint bioluminescent patterns on her neck were flashing a rapid, agitated indigo. She had bypassed the station's security grid with a speed that was terrifying. routing them into the forgotten maintenance catacombs that served as the station's structural spine. "You are quiet," Lyra said, her voice echoing in the small metal box. "It is unsettling." Rylan managed a weak grin. "I am just trying to figure out how I am going to use the bathroom with a 3-foot sword of doom stuck to my hand. It seems like a logistical nightmare." Lyra turned. Her eyes, usually cool and analytical, were dark with worry. She did not smile. "That is your concern? Not the fact that you just consumed a human soul?" Rylan flinched. The memory of the Heliox trooper, the sensation of the man's existence simply winking out like a blown bulb, washed over him. It was not a memory of violence. It was a memory of satisfaction. That was the part that made his stomach turn. "I am trying not to think about it," Rylan admitted quietly. "If I think about it, I might start screaming, and that would echo terribly in here." The lift slammed to a halt. The doors hissed open, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit service tunnel lined with massive pipes and dripping condensation. "Welcome to the blind spot," Lyra said, stepping out. "Even Heliox does not scan down here." She led him through a maze of corridors until they reached a heavy blast door. She keyed in a sequence, and the door groaned open, revealing a safe house that was surprisingly clinical. It was a single large room carved out of the station's hull, filled with computer banks, a medical cot, and a small sparring mat. Lyra pushed Rylan toward the cot. "Sit. I need to scan the neural interface." Rylan sat, the sword clanking awkwardly against the metal frame. Lyra produced a medical scanner, running it over his hand where the white hilt met his skin. "It is integrated with your radial nerve," she murmured, studying the holographic readout. "It is tapping into your bioelectricity. It is not just holding you. Rylan, it is feeding on your baseline caloric output. You will need to eat 3 times as much just to stay awake." "Great," Rylan muttered. "My metabolism finally catches up to my appetite." Lyra set the scanner down and pulled a chair opposite him. She looked at the sword with a mixture of reverence and revulsion. "You need to understand what this is," she said, her tone shifting into lecture mode. "The civilization that built this, the Kailoru, died out 50,000 years ago. They were not conquered. They won. They built these weapons to end a war that had lasted centuries." "They won?" Rylan asked. "Then where are they?" "They are gone," Lyra said, "because the swords did not stop when the enemy died. The Kailoru engineered the blades to be semi-sentient quantum siphons. The theory was that a weapon with a conscience would only kill when necessary. But they made a mistake. They gave the weapons a hunger for the energy released when a consciousness is severed from reality. The blades became addicts. And when the enemies were gone, the blades turned on their masters." Rylan looked down at the black metal. "So it's a parasite. It is a symbiote," Lyra corrected, "but an aggressive one. Here is the rule. Rylan, listen to me closely. Each time you kill, the blade drinks the self of the victim. It uses that energy to empower you, speed, strength, precognition. But the vessel, you, has limited space. To make room for the power, the blade shaves away parts of your own identity." Rylan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp room. What parts? Memories, inhibitions, fear, empathy. Lyra leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Eventually, you become a vessel of pure efficiency, a god of war with no memory of why you are fighting. You become a monster. Rylan, that is why I wanted to destroy it." Rylan swallowed hard. He looked at the blade. It hummed softly, a sound like a purring cat that wanted to eat a bird. "So," Rylan said, his voice straining for lightness, "no killing, just maiming. I can do maiming. I am a diplomat, after all. We are great at hurting people without technically killing them. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the corner of her mouth twitched. A diplomat who smuggles contraband and shoots first. You were a terrible diplomat, Cade. I was a visionary, Rylan retorted. The bureaucracy just couldn't handle my style. Lyra stood up, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we train. If you are going to carry the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, you are going to learn how to keep it from carrying you. The training began 6 hours later, and it was brutal. Lyra was a taskmaster who believed that pain was an excellent teacher. She had cleared the center of the room. Rylan stood in the middle, the sword feeling heavy and awkward. Focus your mind, Lyra commanded. She was circling him, moving with that fluid underwater grace of her species. The blade responds to emotional spikes. Anger feeds it. Fear feeds it. You must be a void. Easy for you to say. Rylan grunted, sweating. You Astrans are born calm. Humans are 90% anxiety and 10% bad decisions. Lyra lunged. She didn't use a weapon. She used her open palm, striking Rylan in the chest with enough force to knock the wind out of him. Focus, she snapped. Rylan stumbled back, the sword flaring with violet light. He felt a surge of irritation, and the blade responded instantly, pulling his arm up for a lethal strike. No, Lyra barked. Anchor yourself. Find a memory that is immutable, something the blade cannot eat. Rylan grit his teeth, fighting the muscle spasms in his arm. He thought of his ship, the Lucky Hazard. He thought of the smell of stale coffee in the cockpit. The violet light dimmed. He lowered the sword. Good, Lyra said, her voice softening. Again. They sparred for hours. It became a dance of violence and restraint. Lyra was faster, stronger, and infinitely more disciplined. She swept his legs, twisted his joints, and pinned him to the mat repeatedly. During one bout, Rylan managed to anticipate her feint. As she moved to strike his throat, he dropped his weight, spinning under her guard and using his free hand to catch her wrist. For a second, he had the advantage, pulling her off balance until they both crashed to the mat. Rylan ended up on top, pinning her wrists to the floor. He was breathing hard, sweat dripping from his forehead. Ha! He panted. One for the human. Lyra looked up at him. Her skin was flushed a deeper blue, her eyes wide. They were chest to chest, the heat radiating between them. Rylan became suddenly aware of how delicate her features were, despite her lethality. The smell of her, like rain on hot stones and something floral, like jasmine, filled his senses. For a moment, neither of them moved. The humor vanished from Rylan's face. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. The sword, sensing the sudden spike in his heart rate, began to hum a low, melodic tone. Lyra didn't push him off. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then flicked back to his eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was a breathless whisper. Your form was sloppy, but your instincts were adequate. Rylan swallowed. I will take adequate. He rolled off her, offering a hand to help her up. She took it, her grip firm, her skin cool against his feverish palm. The moment of vulnerability hung in the air, unacknowledged but undeniable. While Rylan recovered, nursing his bruises and eating a nutrient paste that tasted like wet cardboard, Lyra went to work on the encrypted data drive she had pulled from the Heliox servers during the firefight. The screens on the wall flickered with cascades of alien code. Lyra's fingers flew across the interface, her expression growing darker with every file she decrypted. Rylan, look at this, she said, her voice tight. Rylan walked over, chewing the last of the paste. What is it? Heliox's laundry list? Worse, Lyra said. It is a project file. Halo Null. She brought up a schematic. It showed a map of the border worlds, with red markers indicating refugee convoys and humanitarian corridors. They are not just staging border incidents, Lyra explained, pointing to the data. They are manufacturing a narrative. Look at the psychological profiles attached to the project. They are looking for a figurehead, a necessary monster. Someone who can be blamed for atrocities so horrific that the Senate will vote to give Heliox total military control over the sector to stop them. Rylan felt a cold knot in his stomach. A monster. Like someone wielding a soul-eating sword? Exactly, Lyra said grimly. They wanted the sword to give to one of their own operatives. They wanted to create a warlord to terrorize the Rim worlds. But now they have me, Rylan finished. I am the perfect scapegoat, ex-diplomat turned rogue, wielding a banned weapon. It gets worse, Lyra said softly. She hesitated, her hand hovering over a subfolder. What is it? Lyra opened the folder. It was a financial trail. Complex shell companies laundering credits through a dozen systems. But the origin point was unmistakable. The script codes, Lyra whispered. These are Eastern Treasury bonds. Rylan stared at the screen. You are saying your government is paying Heliox? Funding them, Lyra corrected, her voice hollow. My superiors in the Syndic. They are financing Project Halo Null. They want the war to restart just as much as Heliox does. Peace is bad for business, and it is bad for political control. She stepped back from the console, looking as if she had been slapped. All this time, I thought I was protecting the fragile peace, but I was just a janitor, cleaning up the messes they didn't want the public to see. Rylan watched her. He saw the crack in her composure. The stoic agent was gone, replaced by a woman whose entire worldview had just shattered. Lyra, he said gently. She turned away, pacing the small room. My family. My parents were diplomats too. They died in the first bombardment of the Istra Prime. The Syndic called them martyrs. They built statues of them. They used their deaths to rally the fleet for the counterattack. She stopped, gripping the back of a chair until her knuckles turned white. I always wondered why they were in the capital city that day. They were supposed to be off-world. The Syndic sent them there. They knew the bombardment was coming. They sacrificed them to create a casus belli. She looked at Rylan, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I am serving the people who murdered my family. Rylan stepped forward. He didn't reach for her. He sensed she would break if he did, but he put himself in her line of sight. You are not serving them anymore, Rylan said firmly. You are rogue, Lyra, just like me. Lyra laughed bitterly. Rogue, I am a traitor. I have nowhere to go. You are here, Rylan said, and you have me. I know I am just a smuggler with a cursed sword and a bad attitude, but I am loyal to a fault. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a serious register she hadn't heard before. You are not alone in this. Lyra, I won't let you face them by yourself. Lyra looked at him. She took a deep breath, centering herself, pulling the scattered pieces of her discipline back together. But the wall was down. She looked at him not as an asset, but as a partner. I trust you, Rylan, she admitted quietly, which is terrifying, because you are arguably the most chaotic variable I have ever encountered. But I trust you more than I trust my own high command. Rylan smiled, a genuine soft expression. Chaos is a ladder, or so I hear. We just have to climb it. That night, Sleep was a battlefield. Rylan lay on the cot, tossing and turning. The sword, even while he slept, was active. It seeped into his dreams. He saw himself standing on a mountain of black glass. Below him, millions of people were cheering. They were chanting his name. He was wearing armor made of starlight, and the Eater blade was in his hand, roaring with a fire that eclipsed the sun. "They love you," the sword whispered in his mind. "You are their savior. All you have to do is remove the obstacles. Kill the corrupt, kill the weak, rule them, and they will be safe." In the dream, Rylan raised the sword. He felt a surge of pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. He could fix everything. He could end hunger. He could end war. He just had to kill everyone who disagreed. Yes, the sword purred. Be the king. Rylan woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. The room was dark. The sword was humming loudly, the violet runes casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He was sweating, his heart hammering against his ribs. Bad dream? Lyra's voice came from the corner. She was sitting in the chair, awake, watching him. Rylan rubbed his face with his left hand. "The worst. It offered me the galaxy. Did you take it?" Rylan looked at the sword attached to his hand. It felt like it was disappointed in him. "I thought about it," he admitted. "That is the scary part." For a second, it made sense. Lyra stood up and walked over to him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was grounding, pulling him back from the precipice of the nightmare. "That is the trap," she said. "It weaponizes your desire to do good. It convinces you that the only way to save the world is to conquer it." Rylan looked up at her. "How do I stop it?" "You don't," Lyra said. "You just have to be stubborn enough to say no. Every single day." The heaviness of the moment was broken the next morning by a rhythmic banging on the blast door. Rylan jumped, raising the sword. "Relax," Lyra said, checking the monitors. "It is your crew." She opened the door, and two figures spilled in, carrying duffel bags that smelled of grease and spices. Tarek, a four-armed mechanic with a snout full of sharp teeth and a heart of gold, was the first one in. "Boss, you are alive, and you look terrible." Behind him was Jinx, the ship's pilot, a short, frantic human woman with cybernetic ocular implants that whirred as she looked around. "We brought vital supplies." She dumped the bag on the floor. It contained 6 cartons of spicy noodles, a bottle of bootleg whiskey, and a bag of fresh apples. Rylan grinned, the tension bleeding out of him. "You guys are the best. How did you find us?" Jinx pointed at Lyra. "She sent us an encrypted ping. Said you were starving and getting grumpy." Tarek walked over to Rylan and stared at the sword. "Whoa. That is stuck on there pretty good, huh? Does it have an off switch?" "Not exactly," Rylan said. Jinx looked at Lyra, then back at Rylan, eyebrows raised. "So, you are hiding in a dungeon with the galaxy's most lethal beauty? Talk about a high-stakes date. Did you tell her about the time you tripped over your own cape at the ambassador's ball?" "I did not wear a cape," Rylan protested, his face flushing. "It was a ceremonial sash." Lyra crossed her arms, a hint of amusement playing on her lips. "He has not mentioned the sash. But I am intrigued," Rylan groaned. "Can we focus on the noodles, please?" They ate sitting on the floor, passing the cartons around. It was a brief, necessary moment of humanity. The simple act of eating junk food and trading insults with his friends anchored Rylan more than any meditation technique Lyra had taught him. It reminded him of who he was. Rylan Cade, the guy who liked spicy noodles and bad jokes. Not Rylan Cade, the Dark Lord of the Sith. But the levity was short-lived. Jinx pulled a data chip from her pocket. We picked this up on the wideband receiver on the way down. It is bad. Boss? Lyra took the chip and slotted it into the console. A holographic news feed projected into the air. The headline screamed in bold red letters. Senate calls emergency session. War powers vote imminent. The reporter's voice was breathless. Following reports of a terrorist buildup on the border, the Senate is moving to vote on the Emergency Defense Act in 48 hours. This would grant the Heliox Dominion full jurisdiction over the exclusion zones. Lyra's face went pale. They are fast-tracking it. There is more, Jinx said. Look at the timestamp on the bottom. Lyra scrolled down. There was a leaked transport schedule. A massive convoy of refugees was being routed through the Orion corridor in 3 days. That is the target, Lyra said, her voice ice-cold. The massacre. They are going to attack that convoy. Blame it on rogue elements, probably us, and use the tragedy to force the vote through. Thousands of people, Rylan said, staring at the map. We have to stop them, Tarek growled, clenching all 4 fists. We can't stop them here, Lyra said. We need proof. Irrefutable proof of Project Halo Null. The data I pulled is fragmented. It shows the funding, but not the end game. It is not enough to sway the Senate. Then where do we get it? Rylan asked. Lyra zoomed out on the star map. The signal from the data drive. It is calling out to a remote location. Here. She pointed to a desolate moon on the edge of the charted systems. The archive moon of Nemos, Lyra said. It is a dead world, ancient libraries, abandoned for centuries. But the Halo Null program is beaming data there. That is where the origin signal is. That is where the truth is hidden. Rylan looked at his crew. Prep the ship. We are leaving within the hour. Jinx saluted. The Lucky Hazard is ready to fly. Boss. But getting out of Concordia is going to be tricky. The station is on lockdown. Leave that to me, Lyra said. I know the blind spots in the defense grid. She turned to Rylan. The crew began to pack up the food, giving them a moment of privacy. If we go there, Lyra said quietly, we are leaving the safety of the shadows. Heliox will hunt us. My people will hunt us. And that sword, it will react to the archive. The place is full of ancient tech. Rylan looked at the sword. The violet light was steady, pulsing in time with his own blood. Let them hunt us, Rylan said. I am done hiding in sewers. Let's go find the truth and burn their conspiracy to the ground. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time she smiled, a real fierce smile that reached her eyes. Lead the way, Captain. They gathered their gear, the motley crew of a smuggler, a spy, a pilot, and a mechanic, united by a death sentence and a cursed sword. As they moved toward the blast doors, leaving the safety of the catacombs behind, Rylan felt the sword whisper one last thing before they emerged into the danger of the open galaxy. We are coming for them. And for the first time. Rylan agreed with it. Space outside the viewport of the Lucky Hazard was not the star-strewn velvet of romantic paintings. It was a gritty, abrasive soup of micrometeoroids and radiation belts. They were running dark, engines throttled down to a whisper. Coasting through the tangled shipping lanes of the outer rim to avoid the Heliox patrols that were tearing the sector apart looking for them. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was a friction point between high-concept espionage and low-budget survival. Lyra Vey stood in the cramped galley, staring at the food synthesizer with the expression of a scientist observing a biological hazard. She pressed a button. The machine wheezed, clanked, and dispensed a gray, steaming brick into a plastic tray. It is supposed to be chicken, Rylan said, leaning against the doorframe. He was nursing a mug of coffee that smelled like burnt engine oil. Or maybe tofu. To be honest, the machine lost the flavor codes during the last solar flare. Now everything tastes like generic protein. Lyra looked at the gray brick. Then she looked at Rylan. Her bioluminescent markings were a flat, unimpressed slate gray. "You survive on this?" she asked. "This is not food. This is insulation foam." "It keeps you alive," Rylan said, taking a sip of his coffee and grimacing. "Besides, it builds character. In the Syndic, I bet you have nutrient infusions tailored to your DNA. Out here, you eat what the machine gives you and you say thank you." Lyra picked up a plastic fork and poked the brick. It wobbled. "I am learning that freedom involves a significant amount of gastrointestinal distress," she noted dryly. She turned to leave the galley, moving with a predatory grace that made the cramped corridor feel even smaller. Rylan watched her go, a small smile tugging at his lips. It had been 3 days since they fled Concordia. 3 days of hiding in asteroid fields and slipstreaming behind garbage scows. Lyra was adapting, but it was like watching a panther try to live in a shoebox. She cleaned everything. She organized the cargo bay by weight and radioactive half-life. She fixed the life support scrubbers that Tarek had been holding together with duct tape and prayer, optimizing the oxygen flow by 15%. But she also struggled with the chaotic informality of the crew. Later that afternoon, Rylan found her in the engine room, arguing with Tarek. The four-armed mechanic was hanging upside down from a cooling pipe, welding a patch onto the hyperdrive casing. "You cannot bypass the safety regulator," Lyra was saying, pointing at a schematic on her datapad. "If the core temperature exceeds 4,000 degrees, the magnetic containment will fail. We will be atomized." Tarek flipped his welding goggles up. "Lady, if I keep the regulator on, we max out at warp 4. If Heliox catches us, we get vaporized. If I bypass it, we can hit warp 6 and maybe melt a little bit. I prefer melting to vaporizing. It is a texture thing." Lyra looked at Rylan for support. "Tell him he is violating basic physics." Rylan shrugged, the eater blade clicking against his belt buckle. Tarek sees physics as more of a suggestion. "Just let him work. If we explode, you have my permission to say I told you so in the afterlife." Lyra let out a huff of air that might have been a laugh if she wasn't so annoyed. "You people are insane. You fly a bomb through space and call it a ship." "We call it home," Rylan said softly. The playfulness vanished from the room. Lyra looked at him, and for a second, the distance between the operative and the smuggler closed. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the way he constantly flexed his right hand as if trying to shake off a numbness that wouldn't leave. The sword was quiet today. It hung at his hip like a sleeping viper, wrapped in a heavy magnetic sheath Tarek had cobbled together to dampen its signal. But Rylan could still feel it. It was a cold weight in the back of his mind, a constant low-frequency pressure that whispered of hunger. "We are coming up on the coordinates." Jinx's voice crackled over the intercom. "Strap in, boys and girls. The weather forecast at Nemos is apocalyptic with a chance of gravity shear." Nemos, the archive moon, was a tombstone in the graveyard of history. It orbited a brown dwarf star that cast a sickly, bruised light over the system. The moon itself was wrapped in a perpetual, violent storm system, a swirling cauldron of methane clouds and lightning that arced not down to the ground, but horizontally between the massive, floating ruins that defied gravity. The Lucky Hazard shuddered as it hit the upper atmosphere. "Turbulence," Jinx yelled from the cockpit. "The gravity wells are shifting. It is like flying through a blender." Rylan strapped himself into the co-pilot seat. Lyra took the nav station behind him. "Shields are down to 60%, Lyra reported, her fingers flying across the console. "I am detecting massive energy spikes from the surface. The entire moon is an active machine." "Get us close to that primary spire," Rylan ordered, pointing to a massive black tower that pierced the clouds like a needle. "That is where the signal is coming from." Jinx wrestled with the yoke. "I am trying. Boss!" But the ground keeps moving. Below them, the landscape was a surreal nightmare of physics gone wrong. Massive chunks of stone, the size of cities, floated in the air, connected by bridges of shimmering hard light. Ancient libraries, built by a species dead for eons, rotated slowly in the gloom. Jinx dove the ship through a gap in the storm, flaring the thrusters at the last second to slam them down on a landing platform that was tilting at a precarious 20-degree angle. The landing claws dug into the ancient stone with a screech of metal. "We are down," Jinx panted. "And I am never doing that again without a raise." Rylan unbuckled. "Stay with the ship. Keep the engines hot. If the gravity shifts again, you might have to take off to keep from sliding into the abyss." "Tarek, you are on turret duty," Rylan added. "If anything moves and it is not us, shoot it." "What if it is a friendly ghost?" Tarek asked. "There are no friendly ghosts here," Rylan muttered, grabbing his gear. Rylan and Lyra descended the ramp into the howling wind. The air was breathable but thin, tasting of ozone and ancient dust. The gravity here was heavy, pressing down on their shoulders like a physical weight. They moved toward the entrance of the spire. The doors were 50 feet high, made of a dark, obsidian-like material carved with geometric patterns that seemed to shift when looked at directly. Lyra pulled out her scanner. "It is locked. The encryption is..." Before she could finish, the sword at Rylan's hip pulsed. A violet shockwave rippled out from the sheath. The massive doors groaned. Dust cascaded from the lintel as the stone began to separate. "It knows you," Lyra whispered, staring at the sword. "Or it knows the blade." Rylan felt a sick lurch in his stomach. The sword was happy. It felt like it was coming home. They stepped inside. The interior of the archive was a vast cathedral-like space that stretched up into darkness. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered the sound of the storm outside. Rows of crystalline data stacks towered hundreds of feet into the air, glowing with a faint amber light. "This place is a graveyard of knowledge," Lyra said, her voice hushed. "The Kailoru stored everything here. Their art, their science, their history, and their weapons," Rylan added grimly. They moved deeper into the hall, following the signal Lyra had tracked. It led them to a central console, a circular dais surrounded by floating holographic interfaces. Lyra connected her datapad. The alien systems flared to life, the amber light turning a harsh, urgent red. "I am into the Heliox subdirectory," Lyra said, her face illuminated by the scrolling data. "They have been mining this database for years. They found the blueprints for the Eater Blade here. But that was just the beginning." She froze. "Oh no." "What?" Rylan stepped closer. "Project Halo Null," Lyra read, her voice trembling. "It is not just about the sword. The sword is a harvesting tool. Look at this schematic." She projected a 3D model into the air. It showed a massive neural network, a lattice of artificial intelligence. But the nodes of the network weren't code. They were organic energy signatures. "Soul echoes," Lyra said, horror dawning in her eyes. "The blade drinks the consciousness of the victim. It breaks it down into raw neural data. Heliox is not just trying to make a super soldier. They are trying to build a planetary control AI fueled by the harvested souls of the dead." Rylan stared at the image. A population control system? A pacification grid, Lyra corrected. If they get enough energy, enough souls, they can broadcast a psionic dampening field across an entire sector. It would suppress aggression, dissent, independent thought. They want to turn the galaxy into a hive mind of obedient workers. And the sword is the battery charger. Rylan felt the bile rise in his throat. That is why they need a war. They need a massacre to harvest enough souls to turn the machine on. He looked at his hand. The sword was vibrating violently now. The white grip was warm, almost hot. Rylan, Lyra warned, stepping back. Your bio readings are spiking. The room suddenly spun. Rylan fell to his knees. The archive dissolved. The amber lights vanished. He was standing in a garden. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. The air smelled of jasmine and honey. He looked down. He was wearing white robes. The eater blade was in his hand, but it wasn't black anymore. It was pure, shining silver. Rylan looked up. He was in a plaza in Concordia, but it wasn't dirty. There were no beggars, no armed drones. People were walking, smiling, holding hands. Human, Astron, Krell, all living in perfect harmony. A woman walked up to him. She was beautiful, her eyes full of adoration. "Thank you, King Rylan," she said. "Thank you for the peace. See?" A voice whispered in his ear. It was the sword, but it sounded like his own voice. "It is so easy. No more pain, no more hunger. You just have to cut away the rot, kill the senators, kill the admirals, kill the dissidents, and you can give them this." Rylan looked at the sword. It felt righteous. It felt heavy with purpose. "Take the power," the voice urged. "Be the monster they need so they can be the children they are. Rule them kindly." He felt a surge of desire so potent it nearly brought him to tears. To end the struggle, to simply force the world to be good. "Rylan, wake up," the voice came from far away. A jagged, discordant note in the perfect song. "She does not understand," the sword whispered. "She is afraid of your greatness. Silence her." Rylan raised the sword. The woman in the garden smiled. "Rylan!" A hand grabbed his face, not a gentle touch. A fierce, desperate grip. The garden shattered like glass. Rylan gasped, sucking in cold, dusty air. He was back in the archive. He was on his knees, the sword raised high, ready to strike. Lyra was right in front of him. She had stepped inside his guard. Her hands were cupping his face, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were blazing with terrified intensity. "Look at me," Lyra commanded. "Not the vision. Look at me." Rylan blinked, the violet haze retreating from his vision. He saw the fear in her eyes, but beneath it, a fierce, unwavering belief. "I am here," he choked out. "I am here." Lyra didn't let go. She leaned her forehead against his. He could feel her pulse, rapid and frantic, against his skin. It was the most intimate contact they had ever shared, more raw than any kiss. It was a tether. She was physically anchoring his soul to his body. "Do not listen to it," she whispered fiercely. "Peace purchased with blood is just a graveyard with a different name. You are Rylan Cade. You smuggle pediatric filters for orphans. You trip over ceremonial sashes. You are a mess, and that is why you are human. Do not let it make you perfect." Rylan dropped the sword. It clattered to the stone floor, the hum dying down to a sullen murmur. He wrapped his arms around Lyra's waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He was shaking. "It showed me a paradise," Rylan whispered. "It was beautiful." "It was a lie," Lyra said, her hands moving to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. "The sword does not know beauty. It only knows silence." They stayed like that for a long moment, the storm raging outside. Two small figures huddled against the weight of a dead civilization. The attraction between them wasn't just adrenaline anymore. It was survival. It was the realization that in a universe trying to turn them into tools, their connection was the only thing that kept them real. Finally, Lyra pulled back. She looked shaken but resolute. "We need to finish this," she said. "We found the schematics. Now we need the target." She turned back to the console. Rylan forced himself to stand, keeping a wary distance from the sword on the floor. Lyra typed a command. The holographic map zoomed in on a specific sector. "Here," she said. "The attack plan. They are hitting the Orion refugee corridor in 40 hours. She opened the personnel file attached to the operation. "Commanding officer," she read, "Admiral Marcus Vance." Rylan felt the blood drain from his face. "No," he said. "That is a mistake." Lyra looked at him with pity. "Rylan, the signature is authentic." Rylan stared at the image of the gray-haired man with the stern, kind eyes. Admiral Vance, the man who had recruited Rylan into the diplomatic corps. The man who had taught him that a diplomat's words were stronger than a soldier's rifle. Vance had been a father to him when his own had died. "He is leading the attack?" Rylan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He is on the payroll," Lyra said gently. "Heliox has been paying him for 5 years. He is the one who coordinated the border incidents." Rylan turned away, pacing the circle of the dais. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. "He gave the eulogy at my sister's funeral," Rylan said. "He told me that we serve the coalition to ensure that no more families have to bury their children." The sword on the floor flared. It sensed the betrayal. It sensed the jagged, bleeding wound in Rylan's heart. "Kill him," the sword whispered from the floor. "He lied to you. He is filth. Cut him out of the universe." Rylan stopped pacing. He looked at the sword. This time, he didn't recoil. He reached down and picked it up. The bond snapped back into place, stronger than before. The anger was a fuel source, burning hot and bright. "We are going to stop him," Rylan said. His voice was flat, devoid of the humor that usually defined him. Lyra watched him. She saw the change. The grief was curdling into something dangerous. "Rylan, we will stop him," she said carefully. "But we will do it the right way. We will expose him." "Expose him?" Rylan laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "He is going to slaughter thousands of refugees." "Lyra, a press release isn't going to stop a macro cannon." Lyra grabbed his arm. "And if you kill him in a rage, the sword takes another piece of you. Who will be left? Rylan, will you remember your sister, or will you just remember the kill?" Rylan froze. The mention of his sister cut through the red haze. He looked at Lyra. "I don't know if I can do this without the weapon." "You don't have to," Lyra said. "But you have to choose who wields it. You, or the rage." She turned to the console. "I am sending this data, all of it, the Halo Null schematics, the financial trails, Vance's orders." She keyed in a frequency. It was a restricted channel, but not a syndic one. "Who are you sending it to?" Rylan asked. "The Free Systems Media Alliance," Lyra said. "Independent journalists." She hit the transmit button. The upload bar filled. "Sent," she said. She slumped against the console. "You just committed treason," Rylan said softly. Lyra looked at her hands. "The Syndic will put a bounty on my head. I can never go home. I am an outlaw now." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I chose a side. Rylan, I chose the truth, and I chose you." Rylan holstered the sword. He stepped forward and took her hands. The anger in his chest cooled. replaced by a profound, aching tenderness. "We are both outlaws then," he said. He leaned in, and this time, he didn't stop. He kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was desperate, tasting of dust and fear. But it was electric. It was a seal on a pact. Lyra responded instantly, her hands gripping his jacket, pulling him closer as if trying to merge their timelines into one. For a minute, the galaxy didn't exist. The conspiracy, the sword, the admiral, it all faded. There was only the warmth of her, the beat of her heart, the reality of two people finding shelter in each other in the middle of a storm. They broke apart, breathless. "We have to go," Lyra whispered, her forehead resting against his. "The upload will trigger a silent alarm. Vance will know we have the data." Rylan nodded. He looked at the map one last time. The Orion corridor. "Let's go," he said. "We have a war to stop." They sprinted back to the ship, the wind tearing at their clothes. The storm had intensified, lightning striking the landing platform in rhythmic hammer blows. Jinx had the engines roaring before the ramp was even up. "We have incoming," Tarek shouted from the gunnery station. 3 Heliox interceptors just dropped out of warp. "Punch it!" Rylan yelled. Strapping in, the Lucky Hazard blasted off the platform, dodging a salvo of plasma torpedoes that shattered the ancient stone where they had stood seconds ago. Jinx spun the ship, weaving through the floating ruins. The gravity anomalies tore at the hull, the metal groaning in protest. "Get us to the jump point," Rylan commanded. "We can't jump in the atmosphere," Jinx screamed. "Do it," Lyra shouted. "If we stay here, we are dead." Jinx slammed the throttle forward. The ship shuddered violently as the hyperdrive engaged. The stars elongated into streaks of light. They vanished into hyperspace, leaving the storm and the ruins behind. Silence returned to the cockpit. Rylan stared out at the swirling vortex of the slipstream. He thought of Admiral Vance. He thought of the sword's whisper. He thought of Lyra's kiss. He touched the hilt of the blade. It was quiet now, waiting. It knew what was coming. 40 hours, Rylan said. Lyra stood beside his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "We will be there," she said. They were racing toward a massacre, carrying a weapon that wanted to eat them, hunted by every power in the galaxy. Rylan looked at Lyra and managed a crooked, tired smile. "Just another Tuesday, right?" Lyra squeezed his shoulder. Her eyes were serious, but the corner of her mouth lifted. "Shut up and fly the ship." Smuggler, the Orion corridor was not a place. It was a scar in the vacuum, a graveyard of shipping lanes choked with the debris of 100 desperate migrations. The refugee convoy, a sprawling ragtag serpent of retrofitted haulers and pressurized cargo containers, stretched for 50 kilometers against the backdrop of a binary star system. From the cockpit of the Lucky Hazard, Rylan Cade watched the massacre unfold in high definition. The attack was not a chaotic raid, it was a surgical amputation. Swarms of Heliox drones, painted in the blue and white livery of sector security, moved through the convoy like piranhas. They were targeting the engines of the refugee arcs, crippling them, leaving them drifting and venting atmosphere. "Get us in close!" Rylan shouted, strapping a mag harness over his chest. "Jinx, keep the shields angled forward. Tarek, target the drone control nodes, not the drones themselves. There are too many of them to shoot down one by one." "I am trying." "Boss!" Tarek yelled from the gunnery well. "But they are using civilian frequencies to mask their command signal. If I jam them, I jam the refugee distress beacons too." "Then we do it the hard way," Rylan said, heading for the airlock. Lyra Vey was already there, her fingers dancing over a wrist-mounted tactical display. She looked at Rylan, her eyes hard and bright. "I have linked with the convoy's traffic control," she said, her voice cutting through the roar of the ship's engines. "I can coordinate the evacuation shuttles from here, but the primary docking bay on the lead arc is pinned down. There is a Heliox boarding party breaching the airlocks." Ryland checked the magnetic seal on the Eater blade's sheath. The sword was screaming in his mind. It sensed the violence outside. It tasted the panic of thousands of souls, and it was vibrating with a hunger that made Ryland's teeth ache. "I will clear the bay," Ryland said. Lyra grabbed his arm. "Ryland, remember the rules. Restraint. If you feed it, you lose." "I know," Ryland said grimly. "I am just the delivery guy. No tipping allowed." He jumped. The jump from the Lucky Hazard to the lead refugee arc was a terrifying freefall through a storm of plasma fire and debris. Ryland used his suit's thrusters to navigate the chaotic void, slamming onto the hull of the massive arc with a bone-jarring thud. He cycled the airlock and burst into the docking bay. It was a slaughterhouse. Heliox shock troopers were advancing behind portable energy shields, pushing a crowd of terrified refugees, mostly Krell families and human colonists, toward the rear bulkheads. The air was filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burnt flesh. Ryland drew the sword. The moment the black metal cleared the sheath, the room seemed to darken. The violet runes flared, casting long, unnatural shadows. "Stop!" Ryland roared, his voice amplified by his suit's speakers. The troopers turned. They saw the man with the nightmare blade. They opened fire. Ryland moved. He tried to fight clean. He really did. He used the flat of the blade to deflect plasma bolts. He used the pommel to smash helmets. He moved with a speed that defied biology, weaving through the hail of fire like smoke. But the sword hated it. Every time Ryland pulled a punch, the sword sent a spike of agonizing feedback up his arm. It felt like sticking his hand in a fusion reactor. "Cut them," the voice in his head hissed. "They are meat. They are fuel. Why do you starve us?" Ryland gritted his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. He disarmed a trooper, shattering the man's rifle, then kicked him into a wall. Weak, the sword spat. Inefficient. The pain in his arm intensified when his muscles cramped. The sword made itself heavy, sluggish, punishing his mercy. Ryland stumbled, taking a glancing hit to his shoulder pauldron. He fell to one knee, gasping. The sword was actively fighting him now, resisting his commands. Suddenly, the blast doors at the far end of the bay hissed open. A Heliox commander strode in. He was wearing heavy, devastating class power armor, wielding a rotary plasma cannon. He didn't look at Ryland. He looked at the huddled mass of refugees cowering behind a stack of crates. "Clear the obstruction," the commander ordered. He leveled the cannon at the civilians. There were children in that crowd. Ryland saw a Krell mother shielding her hatchlings with her body. "No!" Ryland shouted, trying to rise. The sword was dead weight. It wouldn't move. "Let me feed," it whispered, "or watch them burn." The commander's cannon began to spin. The high-pitched whine of the charging cycle filled the bay. Time seemed to slow down. Ryland looked at the children. He looked at the weapon. He looked at the impossible distance between him and the commander. He had no choice. "Fine," Ryland screamed in his mind. "Take it." He surrendered to the hunger. The change was instant. The heaviness vanished. The pain was replaced by a surge of ecstatic, terrifying power. Ryland didn't run. He vanished. He became a streak of violet light. He bypassed the troopers. He bypassed the shields. He appeared directly in front of the commander just as the cannon flared. Ryland didn't strike to disarm. He struck to unmake. He drove the Eater blade through the commander's chest plate. The molecular edge sheared through the heavy durasteel like wet paper. The commander didn't have time to scream. The blade pulsed with a blinding supernova intensity. Ryland felt the soul rip loose. It wasn't a trickle, it was a flood. He felt the man's lifetime, his ambition, his cruelty, his fear rush into him. The sword drank it all, and then, in a terrifying feedback loop, it forced that raw energy into Ryland's own neural pathways. The commander's body collapsed, empty and hollow. Ryland stood over the corpse, glowing with an aura of dark, photonic energy. He felt invincible. He felt like a god. He turned to the remaining troopers. "Run!" he whispered. They didn't run. They froze in terror. Ryland raised the hand, and a wave of kinetic force blasted them backward, slamming them against the bulkheads with bone-breaking force. The bay was silent. Ryland stood there, breathing hard. The rush of power began to fade, leaving a cold, oily residue in his mind. And then, the price came due. It wasn't physical pain, and it was a sudden, sharp erasing. He thought of his sister, Ilara. He reached for the memory he used to anchor himself, the sound of her laugh at his graduation. It was gone. Ryland blinked, panic rising in his chest. He tried to grasp it. He tried to remember her face. He saw the shape of her, the color of her hair, but her eyes... He couldn't remember the color of her eyes. Were they green? Were they hazel? "Ilara?" he whispered. The memory was gray, blurry, like a file corrupted by a virus. The sword had eaten it to make room for the commander's death. Ryland dropped the sword. It clattered to the deck, humming with a satisfied, gluttonous purr. Ryland backed away, staring at his hands. He felt sick. He felt lighter. But in the way a man feels lighter after an amputation. A shuttle landed in the bay, the ramp lowering. Lyra ran out, her weapon drawn. She saw the bodies. She saw the refugees, safe but staring at Ryland with utter horror. And she saw Ryland, huddled against a crate, shaking. Lyra holstered her weapon and ran to him. "Ryland, you did it. The evac is clear." Ryland looked up at her. His eyes were wide and hollow. I can't remember her eyes. "Lyra." Lyra froze. She understood immediately. She looked at the sword, then back at him. Her face crumbled with a devastation that broke her usual stoic mask. "Oh. Ryland." She reached for him, but he flinched away. "Don't," he croaked. "I am a monster. I am exactly what they wanted." 2 hours later, the universe confirmed his fears. They were back on the Lucky Hazard, limping away from the corridor at maximum warp. The refugees were safe, scattered to independent systems, but the victory tasted like ash. Jinx stood in the common room, pointing at the holographic news feed. Her face was pale. "You need to see this. Boss." The feed was broadcasting on every major channel in the Human Coalition and the Syndic. It was footage from the docking bay, but it was edited. It didn't show the Heliox commander targeting the children. It didn't show the refugees cowering. It only showed Ryland. It showed him glowing with demonic violet energy. It showed him slaughtering the commander with a brutality that looked sadistic. It showed him blasting the troopers with telekinetic force. The voiceover was smooth, authoritative, and damning, confirming reports that the terrorist known as Ryland Cade has acquired illegal Eastern bioweaponry. The Senate has declared him a Class 1 threat to galactic stability. In response to this massacre, the Emergency Defense Act has passed with a 90% majority. The image shifted to the Senate floor. A tall, elegant alien with shimmering silver skin stood at the podium. Lyra gasped. Senator Valerius. He was her mentor, the man who had taught her politics, the man she had thought was a reformer. Valerius looked into the camera, his eyes radiating sorrow and resolve. "We sought peace," Valerius said, his voice captivating the chamber. "But monsters like Cade and his accomplice, the traitor Lyra Vey, prove that peace cannot be undefended. Order requires strength, We must militarize the corridors. We must hunt these beasts down for the safety of our children. The chamber erupted in applause. Lyra sat down heavily on a crate. "Traitor," she whispered. "He called me a traitor. He is the traitor," Tarek roared, smashing a wrench against the bulkhead. "He is working with Heliox. He won," Rylan said quietly. He was sitting in the shadows, staring at the floor. "He used me. I gave him exactly the footage he needed. I am not the hero. I am the villain of the story." Rylan stood up. The movement was jerky, angry. "I should leave," he said. "If I am not on the ship, they won't hunt you." "Sit down, Cade," Lyra said sharply. Rylan turned on her. "Look at me. Lyra, I lost my sister today. I traded her memory for a kill. How long until I trade you? How long until I forget your name just to win a fight?" He was shouting now, the rage spilling over. The sword, sensing his emotional spike, began to vibrate on the table where they had locked it. "I am dangerous," Rylan yelled. "I am not a person anymore. I am a gun with a heartbeat." Lyra crossed the room in 2 strides. She didn't shout. She grabbed the front of his flight jacket and slammed him against the wall. "Shut up," she hissed. Her face was inches from his. "You are not a gun. You are a man who is hurting, and you are not leaving this ship." Rylan trembled. I can't remember her eyes. "Lyra, it's gone." Lyra softened. She brought her hands up to cup his face, her thumbs tracing the lines of exhaustion under his eyes. "Then we will make new memories," she whispered, fierce and low. "We will fill you back up. But you do not get to quit. You do not get to run away and let Valerius win." Rylan looked at her. The anger drained out of him, leaving him hollow and aching. He leaned into her touch, his forehead resting against hers. "I am afraid," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I am so afraid that I will hurt you." Lyra pulled him closer. The contact was electric, a grounding wire for his fraying sanity. It wasn't about lust. It was about survival. It was a declaration that they were the only 2 real things in a universe of holograms and lies. "Let me worry about that," Lyra said. "What you protect the galaxy. I will protect you." They stood there for a long time, the hum of the ship's drive covering the silence. It was a surrender. Rylan stopped fighting the grief and let Lyra hold it for him. In the circle of her arms, the sword's whisper seemed to fade, drowned out by the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart. The emotional gravity of the moment was interrupted by the sound of a throat clearing. Loudly. Rylan and Lyra broke apart. Jinx and Tarek were standing in the doorway. Jinx was holding a whiteboard. Tarek was holding a plate of something that looked like cookies. "Are we interrupting the brooding phase?" Jinx asked. "Because we have a schedule to keep." Rylan wiped his face, trying to regain some composure. "What is this?" "Intervention," Tarek rumbled, setting the cookies down. "Jinx says you are wallowing. I said you are grieving. We compromised on aggressive moping." Jinx slapped the whiteboard with a pointer. "Look, boss, we get it. You are a wanted fugitive. The galaxy hates you, and you have a magic sword that eats your brain. It is a rough Tuesday. But look at this chart." On the whiteboard, Jinx had drawn a stick figure of Rylan with very messy hair and a stick figure of Lyra with angry eyebrows. She had drawn a heart around them, and then drawn a massive arrow pointing to a drawing of a sad face with a line through it. "Love is a strategy," Jinx declared. "If you two keep staring into each other's eyes and worrying about the impending doom, we are going to fly into a star. You need to focus. You are a team. A weird, highly dysfunctional, chemically imbalanced team. But a team." Rylan looked at the crude drawing. He looked at Tarek's cookies, which appeared to be made of engine grease and chocolate. He laughed. It was a weak, rusty sound, but it was real. "You guys are idiots," Rylan said. "We are your idiots," Tarek corrected. "Now eat a cookie. It helps with the existential dread." Lyra picked up a cookie. She looked at it suspiciously, then took a bite. She chewed thoughtfully. "It is surprisingly adequate," she admitted. Rylan took one. It tasted like sawdust and sugar. It was the best thing he had ever eaten. "Okay," he said, dusting crumbs off his jacket. Intervention successful. "So, what is the play? We can't fight Valerius politically. He owns the Senate. We can't fight Heliox militarily. They have a fleet. And I can't keep using the sword, or I will end up as a drooling husk." Lyra walked over to the navigation console. Her expression shifted from warmth back to the razor-sharp focus of the operative. "We cannot destroy the sword," she said. "We tried. Lasers, plasma, acid. It is indestructible. But there is a legend in the Eastern archives, a myth about the Kailoru end times." She pulled up a star chart. It showed a sector of space that was completely black. No stars, no nebulae, just a void. "The Obsidian Gate," she said. "What is it?" Jinx asked. "A prison? A temple," Lyra explained. "It sits in the orbit of a dead hyperstar, a star that collapsed into a gravity well so dense that time itself moves differently there. The legends say it is where the Kailoru forged the first blades, and it is where they went to silence them." "Silence them?" Rylan asked. "Starve them," Lyra corrected. "The gate has a containment field that severs the quantum link between the blade and the wielder's consciousness. It locks the hunger away. If we can get the sword inside the inner sanctum, we can seal it. Forever." Tarek looked at the readings. "That sector is a gravity reef. Ships get crushed like tin cans. It is a suicide run." Rylan looked at his hand. He flexed his fingers. He tried to summon the memory of Alara's eyes again. He got nothing, just gray static. "Containment is not enough," Rylan said softly. Lyra looked at him. "What do you mean?" "If we just seal it, someone else will find it in 1,000 years, Rylan said. "Valerius will find it. Heliox will find it. The cycle starts again." He looked at the map. "The Obsidian Gate. We are not going there to hide it," Rylan said. "We are going there to end it." Lyra studied his face. She saw the resolve there. It wasn't the manic energy of the sword. It was the quiet, cold determination of a man who had already lost too much and refused to lose anything else. "It is a one-way trip for the sword," Lyra said. "And maybe for us." Rylan took her hand. "Better a one-way trip than a slow fade into nothing," he said. He turned to Jinx. "Set a course for the dead star." "Jinx." Jinx grinned, though her cybernetic eye whirred nervously. "Aye, Captain. Course laid in for the big empty. I hope you guys like crushing gravity." As the ship turned, banking away from the civilized worlds and heading toward the dark unknown, Rylan felt the sword twitch in its sheath. It was afraid. For the first time since he had gripped it, the predator felt fear. Good, Rylan thought. Be afraid. He squeezed Lyra's hand. She squeezed back. They were alone against the galaxy, branded as monsters, hunted by their heroes. But as the stars streaked into the long lines of hyperspace, Rylan Cade realized something. He didn't need to be a hero. He just needed to be the man who broke the sword. The approach to the Obsidian Gate was not a flight path. It was a negotiation with the fundamental laws of physics, and the laws were losing. The lucky hazard shook with a violence that rattled Rylan Cade's teeth in his skull. Outside the reinforced viewports, the universe had stopped making sense. They were deep inside the gravity well of a dead hyperstar, a region of space known to smugglers and lunatics as the Crush. Here, gravity did not just pull, it flowed like a turbulent river, creating invisible reefs that could snap a starship's keel in microseconds. "Hold it together! Jinx!" Rylan shouted over the screaming groan of the hull. "I am trying, boss!" Jinx yelled back, her hands blurring across the controls. Her cybernetic eye was spinning wildly, unable to lock onto a horizon that kept shifting. "But the sensors are hallucinating. We just passed a time shear zone. The port engine thinks it is Tuesday, and the starboard engine thinks it is next century." Rylan looked at the tactical display. It was a mess of red static, but through the interference, 3 distinct signatures were closing in. "They are still with us," Lyra said from the sensor station. She was calm, but her bioluminescent markings were flashing a rapid warning white. 3 factions: Eastern Shadows, Heliox Headhunters, and... She paused, reading the energy signature. "Mercenaries from the Crimson Guild." She finished. "The Senator must have put an open contract on us. Everyone wants a piece of the monster." Rylan looked down at his hand. The Eater blade was vibrating in its magnetic sheath, a low, hungry thrum that resonated in his marrow. It wasn't just reacting to the danger anymore. It was reacting to the destination. "We are close," the sword whispered in his mind. It sounded like his own voice, but older, colder. "Let me out, Rylan. The gravity is heavy. I can cut it. I can cut the weight of the world." "Quiet," Rylan muttered, pressing his hand against the console to steady himself. A warning klaxon blared. "Missile lock!" Tarek bellowed from the gunnery well. 6 torpedoes, incoming vector 390. "They are going to bracket us against the gravity reef," Jinx screamed. "I can't dodge." Rylan unbuckled his harness. He didn't think. He just moved. "Lyra, take the co-pilot seat," Rylan ordered. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, her eyes widening. "I am going to change the physics," Rylan said. He scrambled down the corridor to the airlock. The ship was lurching violently. He keyed the override on the outer door. The safety protocols screamed that this was suicide, that the pressure differential would crush him. He ignored them. He opened the inner door. Stepping into the airlock, he clamped his mag boots to the deck. "Jinx, drop shields on the port quarter," Rylan shouted into his comms. "Are you insane?" Jinx's voice cracked. "Do it!" The shield shimmered and vanished. Rylan punched the button to cycle the outer door. It hissed open, revealing the terrifying, swirling darkness of the Crush. The vacuum didn't suck him out. The artificial gravity of the ship held him. But the sheer proximity to the dead star's pull made his vision swim. The 6 torpedoes were streaks of fire closing in fast. Rylan drew the sword. The blade erupted with violet light, 10 times brighter than it had ever been. It recognized the gravity of the dead star. It drank the ambient energy of the collapsed sun. Yes, the sword roared. Power. Rylan didn't swing at the torpedoes. He swung at the space between them and the ship. He slashed the fabric of the gravity well itself. The Eater blade severed the local gravitational constant. A rift of violet energy tore open in the vacuum, a temporary event horizon that twisted the path of the torpedoes. The missiles didn't explode. They simply turned 90 degrees, caught in the sudden artificial gravity shear Rylan had created. They slammed into the invisible reef of crushed matter to the left of the ship, detonating in a silent, blinding flash of nuclear fire. Rylan collapsed, the airlock cycling shut automatically as the ship surged past the explosion. He lay on the deck, gasping. The sword was hot in his hand, burning through his glove. "See?" the voice whispered, smooth and seductive. "I saved them. I saved her. I can do this forever, Rylan. You just have to stop fighting me. Let me in. I will keep Lyra safe." I will wrap the galaxy in silence so nothing can ever hurt her again. Rylan closed his eyes. For a second, he couldn't remember the color of the Lucky Hazard's hull. Was it gray? Was it red? Gray, he forced himself to think. It is gray rust. He stood up, his knees shaking. The memory returned, but it was slow, like pulling a file from a damaged drive. They made it through the reef. The pursuers, caught in the backwash of the gravity shear, had been forced to break off or risk being crushed. Ahead of them, suspended in the absolute stillness of the dead star's eye, waited the obsidian gate. It was not a building. It was a geometric impossibility. A massive ring of black stone, 50 kilometers wide, floating in the void. Inside the ring, a tetrahedron of dark crystal rotated slowly. Defying the lack of atmosphere, it pulsed with a faint rhythmic heartbeat that matched the thrumming of the sword. Lyra brought the ship in for a silent approach, landing on a docking spire that protruded from the outer ring. "It is dead," Lyra whispered, looking at the sensor readings. No life signs, no power, just waiting. As they prepped their gear, the ship's comm system chimed. A priority override signal pushed through the static. "Rylan," Lyra said, her voice tight, "you need to hear this." A hologram flickered to life on the bridge. It was not Valerius. It was a woman of striking, terrifying beauty. She was an Eastran, like Lyra, but her skin was the color of polished moonlight, and her bioluminescent markings were sharp, angular, jagged lines of gold. She wore the robes of the High Senate, but she wore them like armor. "Senator Ashera," Lyra breathed. "The architect." Rylan stepped forward, the sword sheathed at his hip. "So this is the face behind the curtain." Ashera looked at them with a calm, pitying expression. "Rylan Cade," she said. Her voice was melodic, soothing. "And Lyra Vey, you have traveled far to die in a tomb. We are here to break your toy." "Senator," Rylan said. "My toy?" Ashera smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You think this is a game? You think I enjoy the bloodshed? Look at the galaxy, Mr. Cade. It is a chaotic, screaming mess of competing interests. War is the natural state of biological life." "So you start wars to stop them?" Rylan asked. "We end them," Ashera corrected. "We are building a narrative. People do not unite for hope. Hope is flimsy. People unite against fear. They need a monster, a creature so terrifying that they will gladly surrender their petty freedoms to the one who promises to slay it." She leaned forward, her holographic image looming over the bridge. "You are that monster. Rylan, we made you perfectly the rogue diplomat, the wielder of the Soul Eater. You are the nightmare that will usher in 1,000 years of order." "And if I refuse?" Rylan asked. "Then we will burn the refugee worlds," Ashera said simply. "I have the authorization codes. I can vent the atmosphere of 3 colony moons within the hour. Millions will die, and history will blame you." Lyra stepped into the light. "You are insane, Ashera. You are talking about genocide." "I am talking about calculus," Ashera replied. "A few million lives to save billions from endless, chaotic skirmishes? It is a bargain." She looked at Lyra. "But I am not without mercy. I offer you a trade. Agent Vey, hand him over. Give us the sword and the wielder. Let him play his part in our play. If you do, I will spare the colonies. I will give Rylan a hero's death in the end. And you can go home." Lyra looked at the hologram. She looked at Rylan. Rylan saw the calculation in Ashera's eyes. It was the same cold logic that the sword used. The ends justify the means. "Do not do it," Rylan said softly. Lyra didn't look at him. She looked at Ashera. You want to know why your calculus is flawed? Senator, Lyra asked, her voice steady. Enlighten me, Ashera said. Because safety purchased with the blood of the innocent is not peace, Lyra said. It is just a prison with better marketing, and I would rather die free in a tomb than live in your cage. Ashera's expression hardened. Then you will die. My fleet will arrive in 2 hours. Make your peace with your gods. The hologram vanished. Rylan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at Lyra. You just wagered millions of lives on us, he said. Lyra turned to him. Her eyes were fierce. I wagered on the only thing that matters. If we let them win, those lives are already lost. We have 2 hours to change the rules of the game. They entered the obsidian gate. The interior was a labyrinth of shadows and ancient mechanics. The air was breathable, maintained by scrubbers that had been running for 50,000 years. Gravity here was normal, generated by the station's spin. They moved through vast halls lined with statues of the Kailoru, tall, slender beings with 4 arms and faces hidden behind masks. The sword was pulling Rylan forward. It knew the way. They reached a massive door sealed with a complex arrangement of light beacons. It is a harmonic lock, Lyra said, scanning the mechanism. It requires a specific energy frequency to open. Rylan stepped forward. He drew the sword. The blade hummed, matching the pitch of the silent station. He touched the tip of the blade to the center of the lock. The stone shuddered. The beacons lit up, one by one, in a sequence of violet and gold. The doors ground open. The inner sanctum was not a prison cell. It was a control room. In the center of the vast chamber stood a machine of breathtaking complexity. A spire of crystal rose from a pit of dark liquid, surrounded by floating rings of data interface consoles. Lyra ran to the nearest console. She connected her datapad. This is not a containment unit, she said, her fingers flying across the keys. Rylan, look at this. Rylan walked over, the sword heavy in his hand. He saw the schematics projected in the air. It is a generator, Rylan said. It is a shield, Lyra corrected. She looked up, her eyes wide with realization. The Kailoru didn't build the swords to conquer. They were losing a war against an extragalactic invasion. They built the Obsidian Gate as a planetary defense system, a lattice of energy that could shield entire star systems. But the power requirements, Rylan muttered, reading the alien glyphs that the sword translated in his mind. Infinite, Lyra whispered. They needed a power source that was self-sustaining, perpetual energy. Souls, Rylan said. The horror washed over him. They harvested consciousness because it is the only energy in the universe that doesn't obey the laws of entropy. A soul burns forever. He looked at the sword. It wasn't a weapon. It was a fuel cell, a tragic, horrific battery designed to save a civilization that died before they could turn the switch on. It never wanted to eat, Rylan said, his voice trembling. It wanted to go home. It wanted to upload its harvest to the grid. He looked at the crystal spire. If we activate this, Lyra, if we discharge the energy stored in the sword into the grid, what happens? Lyra studied the readout. The defense lattice would activate. It would project a suppression field across the sector. It would neutralize every weapon system within 10 parsecs. The Heliox fleet, the Ashera's drones, they would all shut down. No one could fire a shot. We can stop the war, Rylan said, not by killing them, by taking away their ability to kill. But there is a problem, Lyra said. Her voice broke. The sword is bonded to you, Rylan. The interface requires a biological conduit to discharge the energy. I have to complete the circuit, Rylan finished. He looked at the crystal spire. He looked at the sword. "If I upload the souls, I upload myself," he said. "It will wipe me clean. I will just be another ghost in the machine." Lyra grabbed his arm. "No, we find another way." "There is no other way," Rylan shouted, the stress finally cracking his facade. "Look at the tactical display. Lyra, they are here in an hour. If we fight them, we die, and they take the sword anyway. If I do this, I save everyone. I save the refugees. I save you. It is the logical choice," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It is the only play I have left." Lyra stared at him. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink. "It is Ashera's choice," she said furiously. "It is the logic of the sacrifice. Destroy the individual to save the collective. If you do this, Rylan, you are not defeating them. You are agreeing with them." She stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. "I did not fall in love with a martyr," she said. "I fell in love with a smuggler who brings cookies to a crisis. I fell in love with a man who is messy and flawed and alive." Rylan froze. "You..." "What?" Lyra didn't hesitate. "I love you, Rylan, and I refuse to let you erase yourself to fix a broken universe. The universe is not worth it if you are not in it." Rylan stared at her. The sword in his hand went quiet. The hunger, the voices, the noise of the dead, it all receded. All he could see was Lyra. He dropped the sword. It clattered to the floor, forgotten. He pulled her into him, burying his face in her hair. He held her like she was the only gravity that mattered. "I don't want to go," he whispered. "I don't want to be a ghost." "Then stay," Lyra said fiercely, gripping his jacket. "We will find a third path. We are smart. We are desperate. Think, Rylan. Think like a smuggler." Rylan pulled back, his mind racing. He looked at the machine. He looked at the sword. A smuggler. He muttered, "We move cargo that isn't supposed to be moved. We bypass customs. We filter the goods." He looked at Lyra. The sword has thousands of souls stored in it. The commander, the soldiers, the ancient victims. They are just raw data now. "We need to dump the cargo without dumping the truck," Rylan said. Lyra looked at the console. "We can set up a filter, a neural firewall. I can use the bond," Rylan said. "Excitement building. I can open the channel, but instead of letting it flow through me, I can direct it around me. I can use the sword's own hunger against it. I can force it to vomit the energy into the spire." Lyra ran the simulation. "It is risky. The feedback could burn out your nervous system. You would need an anchor, something to hold you in reality while the torrent passes through you." "You," Rylan said. "You are the anchor." He picked up the sword. It felt heavy, sullen. It knew what he was planning. It didn't like it. "You will burn," the sword hissed. "You will be a hollow shell." "Shut up," Rylan told it. "I am breaking the lease." He turned to Lyra. "We have to modify the interface. We have maybe 40 minutes before the fleet arrives." Lyra was already typing. "I can patch the targeting array to focus only on weapon signatures. The lattice won't just block everything. It will selectively disarm the aggressors." Rylan grinned. The crooked, reckless grin was back. "So we are going to strip mine the souls of the dead to build a pacifist force field that confiscates guns?" Lyra looked up, a wild, beautiful smile matching his. "Basically." "Let's get to work," Rylan said. They worked in a frenzy of engineering and improvisation. Rylan stripped the safety interlocks from the sword's sheath, wiring it directly into the crystal spire's base. Lyra rewrote 50,000 years of alien code, translating the targeting parameters from exterminate to neutralize. The floor shook. "They are here," Lyra said, checking her wrist display, high above the obsidian gate. Space tore open. The Heliox Armada arrived. Dozens of sleek predatory warships, flanked by Eastern heavy cruisers, and in the center, Ashera's flagship, a massive dreadnought that eclipsed the stars. Rylan stood by the spire. He had wired himself into the machine. Cables ran from the console to the bioports in his flight suit. His hand was gripped around the sword, which was slotted into the crystal interface. He looked at Lyra. She was at the control station, 10 feet away. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra looked at him. Her heart was in her throat. "If this goes wrong..." She started. "If this goes wrong," Rylan said, interrupting her, "tell them I died doing what I loved, voiding warranties." Lyra laughed, a wet, choked sound. "Ready," she said. A holographic projection of Ashera appeared in the center of the room. She looked immense, triumphant. "Time is up." "Rylan," Ashera's voice boomed, "surrender the blade, or we fire." Rylan looked at the giant face of the woman who wanted to save the world by breaking it. He looked at Lyra, the woman who had saved him by loving him. "You want the sword?" Rylan shouted. "Here, have it!" He slammed his hand down on the activation rune. "Now!" he screamed. Lyra hit the enter key. The sword shrieked. It wasn't a mechanical sound, it was the scream of 1,000 ghosts being evicted. Rylan threw his head back and roared. A pillar of blinding violet-white light erupted from the sword, passed through Rylan's body and blasted into the crystal spire. He felt the souls leaving. He felt the commander. He felt the ancient warriors. He felt the weight of centuries of death rushing out of the blade, channeling through his veins like liquid fire. It tried to take him with it. The current pulled at his memories, at his name, at his love. "Come with us," the torrent roared. "Be peace." Rylan held on. He focused on one thing, Lyra's eyes. He anchored himself to the image of her face. He anchored himself to the taste of the terrible cookies. He anchored himself to the smell of ozone and jasmine. "I am Rylan Cade," he screamed into the void, "and I am not for sale." The light intensified. The obsidian gate began to spin. Outside, in the vacuum, the energy wave hit the fleet. It didn't destroy them. It passed through their shields like they weren't there. On Ashera's bridge, the lights died. The weapons consoles went dark. The engines spooled down to a hum. Across the fleet, every plasma cannon, every laser battery, every missile guidance system simply turned off. The defense lattice had awakened, and it had declared a ceasefire. In the sanctum, the light vanished. Rylan collapsed. The cables tore free from his suit. He hit the floor hard. The sword fell next to him. It was gray now, dull. The violet runes were dark. It was just a piece of metal. Silence fell over the room. Lyra ran to him. She slid across the floor, gathering him into her arms. "Rylan! Rylan, breathe!" She checked his pulse. It was faint, thready. "Rylan?" she sobbed. Rylan's eyelids fluttered. He groaned. He opened his eyes. They were hazy, unfocused. He looked at her. Did we get the deposit back?" he whispered weakly. Lyra laughed, tears streaming down her face. She hugged him so hard he wheezed. "Yes," she said. "We voided the warranty." Rylan looked at the sword. It was silent. The hunger was gone. He looked at Lyra. "I remember," he said. "What?" "I remember my sister's eyes," Rylan whispered. "They were green, like moss on a river rock." Lyra kissed his forehead, rocking him gently. "Yes," she said, "they were." Above them, the Heliox fleet drifted powerless, trapped in the orbit of the dead star, held captive by the ghosts of the past. The siege had begun, but the weapons were gone. Now, all that was left was the truth. The interior of the obsidian gate had dissolved into a theater of surreal violence. The discharge of the soul energy had not just powered the defense lattice, it had destabilized the local reality within the sanctum. The vast circular chamber was no longer made of static stone. Massive blocks of black obsidian floated weightlessly, rotating in the air like debris in a slow-motion explosion. The air was filled with ghosts. They were not spirits in the mystical sense, but photonic echoes, the remaining neural data of the sword's victims, projected by the station's confused AI. The Heliox commander Rylan had killed flickered in and out of existence near the ceiling. Soldiers, ancient warriors, and faceless victims of the Kailoru Wars walked through the walls, silent witnesses to the final stand. Rylan Cade stood on the central dais, the Eater blade in his hand. The weapon was no longer glowing with the manic, blinding violet of before. It pulsed with a dull, bruised light, starving and desperate. Opposite him, stepping off a heavy assault shuttle that had breached the sanctum's atmosphere field before the lattice locked down, were the architects of the nightmare. Admiral Marcus Vance moved with the stiff mechanical precision of a man wearing military-grade exoskeleton armor. His face, once kind and fatherly, was now a mask of grim determination. Behind him stood Senator Ashera. She wore no armor. She wore a gown of shimmering white synth silk that seemed to repel the dust of the ruins. She held a slender, gold-plated pistol, but her true weapon was the absolute fanatical conviction burning in her eyes. "It is over." "Rylan," Vance said. His voice was amplified by his helmet, booming through the cavernous space. "The fleet is disabled, but we are not. Hand over the weapon. We can still salvage the program." Rylan looked at the man who had taught him how to tie a tie and how to negotiate a ceasefire. He looked at the gray ghost of his own sister, Ilara, which flickered briefly near a floating monolith before vanishing. "You are not salvaging anything." "Marcus," Rylan said. His voice was rough, scraping against his throat. "You are just robbing graves to build a throne." Ashera stepped forward. "The throne is necessary. Mr. Cade, chaos is the enemy. Look around you. This is what freedom looks like. Ruin. Disorder. We offer structure." Lyra Vey was crouched behind the crystal spire, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, the blood stark and red against her blue skin. "Keep them busy, Rylan," she shouted. "I need 3 minutes to reconfigure the output array." 3 minutes, Rylan muttered. He raised the sword. It felt incredibly heavy, a dead weight of steel and regret. "Take him," Ashera ordered. Vance charged. The Admiral was fast, his exoskeleton whirred as he closed the distance, swinging a heavy shock baton capable of shattering concrete. Rylan dodged, the movement fluid but exhausted. He parried with the sword, the metal ringing with a sound like a cracking bell. The impact sent a shockwave through Rylan's arm. He stumbled back, slipping on the smooth floor. Vance pressed the advantage. He was a soldier. Rylan was a diplomat who had learned to fight in back alleys. The difference in discipline was brutal. Vance landed a kick to Rylan's ribs, sending him skidding across the dais. "Stay down, son," Vance grunted, standing over him. "Do not make me kill you. I loved you like my own." Rylan coughed, tasting copper. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have tried to turn me into a butcher." He scrambled up as Vance swung again. This time, the sword reacted. "Danger," the blade whispered. "Feed me." The violet light flared. Rylan blocked the baton, and the sword sheared through the electrified truncheon, slicing it in half. Rylan spun, bringing the blade around. He could have taken Vance's head. The opening was there. The sword screamed for him to take it. "Finish him! Drink the traitor!" Rylan gritted his teeth and twisted his wrist at the last second. He struck Vance with the flat of the blade, slamming him into a floating pillar. The exoskeleton sparked and seized, pinning the Admiral against the stone. Behind them, Ashera raised her golden pistol. She didn't aim at Rylan. She aimed at Lyra. "No!" Rylan roared. He sprinted toward the crystal spire. Ashera fired. A beam of coherent light scorched the air. Rylan threw himself into the path of the shot. The beam hit his shoulder, burning through his flight jacket and searing the flesh beneath. He cried out, crashing into the base of the console, but he was still moving. He raised the sword, pointing it at Ashera. Ashera sneered. She raised the pistol for a kill shot. Suddenly, the air around Rylan warped. Time stopped. The battlefield vanished. The ruins, the Admiral, the Senator, they all dissolved into mist. Rylan was standing in a throne room made of starlight. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting a galaxy that burned with a cold, orderly white fire. He was sitting on a high seat. Lyra was beside him. She was wearing regal robes of deep indigo. She was safe. She was smiling. But her eyes were blank, void of the fire and wit he loved. She was perfect, and she was hollow. Below them, billions of beings bowed in silence. There was no war. There was no hunger. There was only the silence of absolute submission. "This is the gift," the sword whispered. The voice was everywhere, in the walls, in the floor, in his own blood. "I can give this to you. You can save her. Look at her, Rylan. She will never be hunted. She will never bleed. You just have to let me in, fully. Let me erase the doubt. Let me erase the hesitation." Rylan looked at the vision of Lyra. He reached out to touch her hand. It was cold. It felt like the hilt of the blade. "Kill the Senator." The sword urged. "Kill the Admiral. Drink them. Become the king of silence." Rylan looked at the perfect, peaceful galaxy. It was terrifying. It was a graveyard with the lights left on. He looked at the hollow Lyra. "That is not her," Rylan whispered. "It is a better version." The sword purred. Safe. Eternal. Rylan closed his eyes. He thought of Lyra arguing with Tarek about engine safety. He thought of her eating the terrible cookie and pretending to like it. He thought of the fierce, messy, terrified woman who had told him that the universe wasn't worth saving if he wasn't in it. "I don't want safe," Rylan said. "I want real." He opened his eyes. The violet fire in them died. "I reject you," he said to the sword. "Then you will die." The sword shrieked. "I would rather die a man than live as a god," Rylan said. He shattered the vision. He was back in the obsidian gate. The pain in his shoulder was a blinding white agony. Ashera was pulling the trigger. Rylan didn't strike her. He turned and drove the sword into the interface port of the crystal spire. "Lyra! Now!" he screamed. Lyra slammed her hand onto the console. "Upload!" Lyra commanded. The sword didn't release energy this time. It released data. The soul echoes stored within the matrix, the memories of the victims, the encrypted logs of the Heliox researchers, the recorded conversations of Admiral Vance, the financial transfers from Senator Ashera, were stripped from the blade's quantum storage. But they weren't vented into space. They were broadcast. Lyra had hacked the Obsidian Gate's communication array, a system designed to send warnings across galaxies. She turned the weapon into a microphone. The energy surged through Rylan, but he didn't fight it. He let it flow. He wasn't the dam, he was the wire. The truth exploded outward at the speed of light. Across the galaxy, screens were hijacked. In the Senate chamber on Coruscant Prime, the session was interrupted. Giant holographic projections of Senator Ashera appeared, not giving a speech, but in a recorded, encrypted call with a Heliox executive. "The refugees are acceptable collateral," the recording of Ashera said, her voice clear and undeniable. "We need the bodies to fuel the lattice. Burn the convoy in the barracks of the Coalition fleet. Soldiers watched footage from Ryland's memory, the unedited version. They saw Vance ordering the attack. They saw the Heliox commander targeting children. In the streets of the refugee colonies, the screens showed the truth of Project Halo Null. They saw the schematics of the soul harvesting machine. The narrative broke. In the Obsidian Gate, Ashera looked at her datapad. It was scrolling with thousands of frantic messages. Her accounts were frozen. Her allies were disavowing her. Arrest warrants were being issued in 12 systems. "What did you do?" she whispered, the color draining from her face. "I gave them the one thing you couldn't spin," Lyra said, standing up from the console. "The truth!" Ashera screamed in rage. She raised her pistol again, but the defense lattice was fully active now. The AI recognized the weapon. A beam of soft, blue light descended from the ceiling. It didn't burn Ashera. It simply enveloped her in a stasis field. She froze, trapped in a pillar of light, her face twisted in a mask of fury. Vance, still pinned by the malfunctioned armor, looked at Rylan. He looked at the holographic projections of his victims that were now fading, their purpose fulfilled. He slumped, the fight leaving him. "You did it," he murmured. "You actually did it." Rylan didn't answer. He was holding onto the hilt of the sword, but his grip was loosening. The blade was changing. The black metal turned a dull, matte gray. The heartbeat stopped. The hunger evaporated. The fail-safe Lyra had coded kicked in. The sword locked. Mechanical clamps surged out of the crystal spire, wrapping around the blade, fusing it to the station's core. It was no longer a handheld weapon. It was a structural component of the gate. To remove it, 2 biometric keys were required simultaneously. One from Rylan, one from Lyra. It was sealed. Rylan let go. He stumbled back, his legs giving way. "Rylan!" Lyra was there before he hit the ground. She caught him, lowering him gently to the cold stone. Rylan looked up at her. His vision was swimming. He felt light, too light, like he was floating away. Did we turn off the lights?" he mumbled. Lyra smiled through her tears, pressing her hand to the wound on his shoulder to staunch the bleeding. "Yes," she said. "We turned off the lights, and we turned on the truth." Rylan frowned. He looked at her face. He reached up with a trembling hand to touch her cheek. You are the spy, right? The one with the sash?" Lyra's heart stopped. The memory damage, the massive data dump had scoured his neural pathways. "I am Lyra," she whispered. "I am the one who loves you." Rylan blinked. "Lyra. That sounds important. I feel like I should know that." He smiled, and it was the old, crooked smile, even if the eyes were confused. "You are very pretty for a hallucination." Lyra let out a sob that was half laugh. She leaned down and kissed him. "I am not a hallucination, you idiot. I am your partner, and we have a lot of work to do." Recovery was not a montage. It was a slow, painful climb. Rylan spent 2 weeks in a med tank on a neutral medical station. When he woke up, he knew who he was, mostly. He knew he was Rylan Cade. He knew he flew the Lucky Hazard. He knew he hated synthetic chicken. But there were holes. He couldn't remember the last 5 years of his diplomatic career. He couldn't remember the face of the Heliox commander he had killed. And, cruelly, he couldn't remember the first time he met Lyra. He sat on the observation deck of the station, watching the stars. Lyra sat beside him, holding a datapad. "Tell me again," Rylan said. Lyra scrolled to a file. It was a security recording from the bazaar on Concordia. "You were arguing about a crate of pediatric filters," Lyra said, recounting the story she had told him a dozen times. You lied to a port official with a straight face. You looked incredibly smug. Rylan watched the recording. He saw himself on the screen. He saw Lyra step out of the shadows. "I look annoyed," Rylan noted. "You were terrified," Lyra corrected. "You just hide it well with sarcasm." Rylan looked at her. He took her hand. His fingers traced the patterns on her skin. "I don't remember falling in love with you," he said quietly. "That is the part that hurts. I know I love you. I feel it every time you walk into the room. But I lost the beginning." Lyra squeezed his hand. "Then we will just have to make a new beginning," she said. "We have the rest of our lives to fill in the blanks." Rylan smiled. He leaned his head on her shoulder. "So, what happens now? The hero rides off into the sunset?" "Not exactly," Lyra said. "The political fallout was a tectonic shift. With the truth exposed, the Heliox Dominion's charter was revoked by the Interstellar Senate. Their assets were seized, their fleets nationalized. Senator Ashera was awaiting trial for crimes against sapience. Admiral Vance had pleaded guilty and was serving a life sentence in a rehabilitation colony, spending his days writing memoirs that warned against the seduction of absolute order. A new coalition was forming, the Treaty of Nemos. It established strict transparency laws for corporate entities and created a civilian oversight committee for military operations. Lyra Vey was offered the position of Director of Galactic Intelligence. She stood in the office of the High Chancellor, looking out at the skyline of the capital. "I accept," Lyra said, "but on one condition." The Chancellor, a weary but hopeful high-level elder, nodded. "Name it." "No more secret mandates," Lyra said. "No more silent weapons. If we find something dangerous, we don't bury it. We destroy it. And I answer to the Senate, not the shadows." "Agreed," the Chancellor said. "And what of Mr. Cade?" "We have a medal for him." "He doesn't want a medal," Lyra said, smiling. "He wants a new hyperdrive regulator and a crate of real whiskey." 6 months later, the Lucky Hazard sat on the landing pad of a lush, terraformed moon. It wasn't a hidden base anymore. It was a transit hub. Rylan walked down the ramp, carrying a crate of supplies. He looked healthy. The scars on his shoulder had faded to silver lines. The darkness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. Tarek and Jinx were arguing by the cargo bay. "I am telling you," Tarek was saying, "we can fit 20 more refugees if we stack the bunks 3 high. "And I am telling you," Jinx countered, "if we do that, the life support will smell like wet socks within an hour." Rylan dropped the crate. "You guys are still fighting about the socks?" "It is a valid concern," Jinx shouted. Lyra walked down the ramp behind him. She was not wearing a uniform. She wore a simple flight suit, her hair tied back. She looked less like a weapon and more like a woman who had finally found home. "We have the clearance codes for the sanctuary route," Lyra said, handing Rylan a data pad. 300 families from the war zones. We can get them to the safe harbor colonies in 2 days.